All right. I have Ronnie Landis on the podcast today. I'm excited to talk to you. I know you have an extensive background in, the raw living foods, detoxification. I know that you rub shoulders with David Wolfe, Gabriel Cousins, some people that I look up to, and I know you have tons of knowledge and experience. So just excited to talk to you and connect. So just want to say thanks, and I appreciate you giving me some of your time, man.
Awesome. Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Chris. Excited to dive deep down the rabbit hole with you and see where it takes us.
That's funny you just said the word rabbit hole, because I was going to mention, because I'm a fan of your podcast and I've been listening to it for a while. And you have an audio clip in the beginning of your show where a guy says, I'm going down this never ending rabbit hole of health and detoxification. I'm slowly trying to claw my way back out of it. I'm like, hey, that's me. I can totally relate to that. Just with all the social media influence and all the information out there, it's a little confusing. So I totally resonated with that guy when he said that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was Jason Robel.
Okay.
On that clip. There's definitely someone you might want to bring on your show at some point.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. So I've been a fan of your podcast for a while, and I think I found you through, I want to say Dan McDonald. Maybe you're on one of his videos back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking a while ago. So I think that's how I came across you, but just never got to the point to connect. So I finally reached out, and so here we are today. But I just like your style, your approach, because you promote, simple living foods, some simple practices to detoxification. You don't get too crazy going down those rabbit holes. So I just like your style and what you're promoting. So I'm just excited to connect. So here we are. So because I feel like you have a little more experience in kind of like the metaphysical realm, kind of the quantum theory kind of stuff. And that's not so much my experience. It's not my pay grade, but because when I hear people talking about like astrology or chakras or crystals, I kind of check out, because that's kind of like that kind of a little bit of the woo-woo stuff. But I know there's some definite benefit to that if you can just apply it and understand how it works. So I'm excited to talk to you, just kind of learn a little bit more for myself. So, oops, sorry. All right. So maybe just for the listeners, I know your background, where you came from, but maybe just for the listeners, just kind of give a brief summary of how you got into health, and what are your credentials? Like what do you have as a background?
Cool. Yeah. Well, so the way that I got into this was I basically was raised as a martial artist since the age of 4. So I've been a high performance athlete, a martial artist. I was Olympic hopeful in Taekwondo in the early 2000s, and basically trained my entire life as an athlete, martial artist, a basketball player, just a really high level competitor and performer, and really developed a level of mastery in the physical body. And one of the essential pieces that was missing was the nutrition piece. And it wasn't until I was about 18 years old, when I was at the height of my competitive career, that I had my first knee injury, which led to a knee surgery. And so that's when kind of the brakes got put on everything, and I had to start reevaluating my lifestyle. I started to have some realizations around food and our food supply. I started to do a lot more research, and long story short, I got into organic food. That was how I just got into it. I started studying our agricultural system. I started studying kind of the food pyramid and looking at that, and really just reevaluating everything that I was doing to fuel my body, because I realized that, if I can't heal my body as quickly as before, because before I've had like broken bones and broken noses and broken arms and stuff like that. But the knee injury and the surgery really was a challenge for me. And I really had to go through more of a regenerative approach and rehabilitation through corrective exercise and stuff. And so through that journey, I started to look at other modalities. And so I started to get into the whole food thing. And then when I was about 21, 22 years old, I started really getting serious about nutrition. I started studying I got into like more of the paleo side of things, but then eventually I transitioned out of that and then got more into vegetarianism, veganism, and raw food. And that's really what changed my life. I got deep into David Wolfe's work and Gabriel Cousins and Brian Clement of the Hippocrates Healing Center. Got really into detoxification and cleansing and fasting And that's really like, it became more of like a mission for me. It became more of a spiritual pursuit as well as a health pursuit. And, you know, long story short, what happened to me is that within 30 days of getting on a living foods program, basically fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, some fermented foods, green juices, fruit smoothies, you know, kind of more of like a high fruit, high vegetable, just basic raw food approach, no animal foods, no cooked foods, no processed foods. And I just ran it as an experiment. I just wanted to see what would happen if I did raw food for 30 days. Within 30 days, I completely healed my knees, no inflammation, no nothing, completely all went away. I ran 5 miles in the hills, which I wasn't able to do for years, but I loved to do growing up. And I just found myself doing that just almost unconsciously. I like went right back to it as if I forgot that I was ever in pain. And that was like a moment of like insight. I realized like true healing isn't just healing the body. It's actually healing the psyche. It's healing your memory. It's healing your kind of your identity, because before my identity was rooted in this habit that I had to ice my knees every single day. And I couldn't do certain things because I would re-injure my knee. Right. So I kind of, that identity shifted naturally through living food nutrition. And I forgot that I was ever in pain, and I went back to doing what I love to do. And that was the insight that really woke me up. And I realized like, wow, what I eat really does affect a lot of different things. And a lot of my pursuit over the last 10 years of being a professional, excuse me, being a professional nutritionist has been how food affects consciousness, you know, how food affects our psychology. Right. You know, in the Upanishads, which is a Sanskrit kind of tome or text, a Bible, if you will, there's a phrase in there that says the subtle energies of our food becomes our mind. And so as I started diving deeper into more the spirituality and the metaphysics of things, I realized how essential the food component was. And that's pretty much been my pursuit over the last 10 years of really understanding physiology, understanding anatomy, digestion, hormones, every single area, everything you can imagine when it comes to physical health, but also studying psychological health, studying emotional health, studying the psycho-spiritual aspect of our reality. How does our spiritual health affect our life in our physical body? You know, it's just like, it's really taken me down endless amounts of rabbit holes. That's what I love to do. I'm a researcher. I dive deep into things. I want to know what's really going on in this reality. How can we alter reality through our lifestyle? How can we perform at our absolute best in life and get the most out of this thing we call life?
Yeah. Now, are you pretty strong? Do you base a lot of your stuff? Does it have to be science-based? Because I feel like a lot of stuff, like when you start talking about, you know, energetics and spiritual stuff, like the chakras, and you can't really have a barometer to measure those or quantify those for some of those things. So are you pretty science-based, or do you kind of go in between both? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an integration. I think you have to have a competency both in the seen and unseen worlds. So for me, I'm very, very scientific. I understand the science of what's going on with nutrition in the body and all these different aspects. But science can't quantify a lot of what is going on in our universe. A lot of what's going on with healing. Like, you can't really quantify the healing experience. Like, what actually heals us? Is it the food? Is it the compounds? Is it the nutrition? Or is it something, or are those things catalysts to what actually heals the body, which I believe is more of a spirit or soul-based experience? So it's kind of like, you know, looking at quantum physics and looking at the material world, there's an in-between to those things of the quantum world transitioning into the material world. You know, because everything in the material world started out as an unseen phenomenon, an unseen energy. How do you quantify that? Well, I think this is kind of my feeling is that it's probably better to, instead of trying to quantify or measure energy, it's better to measure the effects of energy. Because you can't quantify what you can't see, taste, touch, smell, sense. unless you're intuitively sensing that. But again, that's not necessarily a material scientific thing, right? But you can apply the scientific method to the outcome, to the result. So if somebody goes through like a transcendental meditation or goes through some kind of, let's call it a spiritual or metaphysical experience, like a spontaneous remission, you know, they have a, for example, somebody has an identity change, they have a personality change, and they change from somebody who always gets the common cold, somebody that, or better yet, the identity of somebody who has cancer. You know, somebody has an autoimmune condition, and they somehow, through whatever modality, they upgrade their operating system and they change that identity to somebody who's fully vital, fully healthy, doesn't have any of those conditions, and they actually heal that.
Right.
You can't necessarily determine what it was that caused that, but you can determine the outcome. And that's what I'm really interested in, because I think that in our world, you know, you can go on either side. You could go like super esoteric and get kind of lost in the rabbit hole of the esotericism and you know, the smoke and mirrors and the new age kind of thing. And like you said, like the crystals and chakras and stuff, which are valid, but it depends on how it's being communicated. It depends on who's giving the message, because some people can't really articulate how that works, so it doesn't really make sense.
Right.
And then there's the hyper materialistic world, which is like all science. Science is a solution to everything. But if that were true, we wouldn't be living in the world we're living in, where we're destroying the environment, the ozone, the acidification of the oceans, our food supply is totally chemicalized, factory farming. All that is a byproduct of an over scientific or scientismic, and it's a scientific religion called scientism, which isn't necessarily scientific, but it's like a hijacking of the scientific method. And it's basically materialism. That's the far extreme. And so what I'm really trying to do is bridge and integrate the best of both worlds to create a complete picture of what makes sense, you know, because every one of us, especially if you do go down the raw food world, the raw food path, you do find that there's certain things that start to occur, like your consciousness starts to open up more. You start to become more available for intuitive insights, right, that you may not have had before. Certain things that you may not be able to explain scientifically start to happen, but that doesn't make them less valid. It just means your mind may not be able to explain it based on the old paradigm. So, you know, I'm grounded in science. I like to understand how things work mechanistically, but I'm not attached to it. If I can't figure it out scientifically, but I can have an experience of it, then I'll take the experience over the explanation.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily matter what the method is, but what the result of it was. You can't always explain it, and that's not always what's important. So yeah, just is it benefiting you? Yeah, as the result, the experience of it, you know, being a service to you. So that's a good point. And I think too that science, you know, talking about the word lag time, we'll get into that too, with changing, you know, personality and thought patterns. But I think there's a lag time with science too, and you know, experience that's happening in real time. So science is always trying to dissect things and micromanage things, and so they're a little bit behind. And people are doing some crazy things with fasting, and you know, there's a lot of like this unfooding that's going on for people to change their physiology and clean themselves, detox. So science is a little bit behind. Yeah, it's valid, but yeah, I think the actual real-time experiences are going to reveal more in the long run, I think, than science is. So, and it's funny too, you mentioned a minute ago about icing your knee, and that you know, the paradigm of that's what you thought you should do because that's what you've been kind of indoctrinated with or brainwashed with. So getting into that about how we conceptualize and perceive things and what we've been told and what we believe, how does one begin to change that perception of not just what they believe, but that internal story that we have of ourselves? And it's usually a negative one, right? We always focus on the negative story instead of the positive things. So how does one change that and get to this goes into that lag time that I love that you talk about our future selves and what we see, but we're stuck back here. So how do we begin to change and transition to that process? I know it's a big question, but yeah.
So it's a great question. Such a good question. And, so the first part is that lag time perspective. So, let's talk about just the quantum perspective to all this. So the quantum world, the quantum physics perspective is that everything that happens in the seen world, the material world, first occurs in the unseen world. We call that the quantum reality. So the quantum reality is basically where you can have a spontaneous manifestation of a feeling or a thought, right? And so if you're in a transcendental meditative state, for example, you can spontaneously feel the reality of, who you can be, a vision, a quote unquote materialization of a future possibility. And you can feel that in that moment as if it were happening in real time in the material world, right? But when you open your eyes, it's like nothing changed, right? It's like, wait, where did all that go? All of a sudden, I feel like I was having an experience and now I'm shifting back into an old paradigm, or everything in my sensory world looks the same as it did, right? And this is the big distinction when it comes to transformation, because transformation happens in an instant, but it has to be sustained consistently over time by rituals and habits and patterns that are congruent with the transformation itself, with what's on the other end of the transformation. So, for example, so that's lag time, and this is what trips people up when they're going through a transformational experience or they're going through a cleansing program, is that there's old habits, there's old patterns, and there's old reference points that we are attached to. We could call these addictions of one sort or another, that we're attached to based on who we used to be, based on who we've been accustomed to being. Right? One of the things I try to tell people is that you never want to sacrifice what you can be for who you have been. Right? And so that sounds great. It sounds really, really inspiring. However, how do you make that transition? Well, the most simple way to explain that is that your personal reality is created from your personality. So if you want to change your personal reality, you have to be able to change your personality. And an easy way to understand what that is your personality is basically an accumulated set of rehearsed patterns and thought patterns and habits and emotional patterns that create an identification, that create moods and temperaments. And eventually that temperament that's been rehearsed emotionally over time creates personality. It's an identity, a psychophysical, emotional perspective, who we're rehearsed over and over and reinforced over and over, creates the habit of who we've been. So essentially what we're trying to do is break the habit of who we've been so we can start to create a new habit of who we can be. Right. And so that's the lag time. It takes time in the material world. In the quantum world, it's spontaneous. It can happen instantaneously. So what that indicates is that if you want to create rituals to get your emotional chemistry in your body to shift out of the stress-based chemistry and the basically programmed response patterns and shift into the new state of being, which creates that new reality, you have to have rituals like meditation rituals that you can return to that help you create that spontaneous feeling. Right? And we've all heard this, like in The Secret and all these other, With the Belief and different documentaries, of, how to manifest and how to create your reality. All that's true, all that's valid, but we only get little teasers or little tidbits of what that is, and where the rubber meets the road is are your habits and your patterns and your thoughts congruent with the person that you can be, right? And then this is where the food thing comes in, because for me, my higher kind of self, if you will, the higher version of myself is someone who doesn't live with addictions, who's not roped into addictive patterns, someone that's sovereign. So again, I'm not addicted to whatever the things are, whether that's food addictions, that's social media addictions, that's people pleasing addictions, validation, et cetera, et cetera. So in order for me to live over here, I have to disassociate from those addictive patterns. I have
Right.
to free myself. And this is the hard part, because people are addicted to many things. You know, they're addicted to their past. They're addicted to social approval. They're addicted to the dopamine effect that they get when they go on their phone and they go on Facebook or Instagram. And you know, the food thing is obvious, right? You do an entire
Right.
podcast talking about that. So cleansing and detoxing is absolutely essential. And what's great about going through a cleanse or a detox is that you can do all this work within that process. Because the idea of like fasting, for example, is that you're abstaining from certain things. You're abstaining from the old food habits or food altogether. You're abstaining from, ideally, you're abstaining from your work environment, your normal environment. You got to change the environment that you're used to incubating in, because your environment is actually influencing your psyche. It's influencing your epigenetic triggers that are creating a cascade of chemistry in your body, typically stress-based chemistry for most people. So you have to shift the outer environment to influence the inner environment. And
Right.
you know, vice versa, the inner environment shifts the outer environment. But for most people, they have to actually change the external environment so they can actually get within to figure out what's going on inside themselves, and then they can start to shift externally. So you know, I think just in a nutshell, having those rituals and those practices that are aligned with who you want to be and what you want is essential. And the more you practice that, and you can reinforce those patterns that are congruent with what you want and who you want to be, will help to disassociate from who you've been. It's not comfortable. It's not easy.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
just like a cleanser, detox, or you know, like someone who's like a parasite or a viral infection or something. It's going to try to hold on. It's going to try to lock on. The old identity is going to try to lock on for dear life. And you got to be
Yeah.
disciplined. You got to be focused on what you want. And that's the key. Focusing on what you want, not on what you don't want. Focusing on those positive, uplifting emotions so you can repattern the emotional chemistry of the body from a place of stress to a place of gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's great. By the way, I appreciate that response. I think a lot of people too get hung up, and I'm guilty of this too. Is we make some unhealthy choices, but it's out of self-love. You know, they might be unhealthy, but we're doing it because the opposite would be going down a road that we know is going to be stressful. The road to change, the road to transformation. There's fear there because it's the world of unknown. We don't know what's going to happen, so it's fearful. So we make these unhealthy choices because we still love ourselves and we don't want to deal with that stress. But it's a quick fix, right? It's not sustainable long term. But even though we are making bad choices, it's coming from a place of love. Does that make sense? Does that sound?
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
get what you're saying. I think it's coming from a place of self-preservation.
Right. Right.
You know, when you think of like self-love, think about, you know, how would you love your child, for example? You know, you would, as a parent, you'd probably think a little bit longer than just that craving, right? You would think a day or two or their entire life ahead. And you know, like, I'm not going to feed my child refined sugar or certain processed foods or certain things that I know have chemical opiates in it, because it's going to create an addictive pattern. Even if that child is like wanting it. Well, we have an inner child inside of us, right? And so from one perspective, you could say like, yeah, it's just self-love. I'm giving a little sweetness. And, you know, it depends on what, you know, maybe that's a piece of fruit or something. For some people, maybe that's a Snickers bar. What I would say is that it's an identity preservation, or, you know, if you, from the context I was talking about before, and it's not right or wrong. That's the thing. It's not right or wrong. It's just about looking beyond the moment, looking beyond this moment where I have that craving. What would love do? Right? For me, most of the time, love would be abstaining from this craving, because I know that if I give into it, I'm weakening my will.
Right.
I'm weakening my discipline. I'm setting myself up to create reoccurring patterns that are going to take me further and further away from the trajectory that I want to go. It's going to make it harder in the long term for me to make that transition if I give in this moment. Even though in this moment, it seems inconsequential, doesn't seem like a big deal. It's just a little, it's whatever, just a little thing. But the consequences don't necessarily make themselves totally obvious to us until we've repatterned in an addictive pattern or a craving. And then a week later, we're like, oh my God, wait a minute, what just happened? I was doing so good. And then I slipped and all of a sudden I'm back over here again. And it feels twice as hard. So so that's the thing. Like, love is not comfortable. And anyone in a relationship knows this. Like, love is not necessarily comfortable. Doing the quote unquote right thing is not always comfortable, but the truth is still the truth. The right thing is still the right thing. And the way that I like to just kind of neutralize it all is that it's a question between familiar and unfamiliar. So when for example, when someone says like, oh, this just feels right, a lot of times what they mean is that this feels familiar.
Yeah.
Like, this is I'm familiar with this. So that's why it feels right, because it actually feels comfortable. It feels familiar, even if it's not, even if it's completely, it's a toxic relationship or it's whatever the thing is, right? It's familiar. But going into the unfamiliar is uncomfortable, right? That's the lag time. That's to sit in that gray space.
That's the space
where it seems like that's the space, and where it seems like nothing is happening. You have to be with yourself. You have to be with your patterns. But if you can sit with it, it doesn't take long. You just have to sit with it and just be neutral. You feel everything that comes up. You let it come through so you can see what is going on. You can see the patterns and associations that have been created. And then from there, you have a conscious choice as to what direction you're going to go. And the unfamiliar is where all the magic happens. So think about this. If you're trying to change your life, you're trying to change your identity, that's going to be pretty familiar territory because you've never been that person, never created those results before. So you don't have a reference point for it. You don't have an emotional reference point for how that feels. So the only thing you can draw upon is that it feels uncomfortable, that it feels unfamiliar. And if you know that intellectually, you can kind of ingrain that point. Then okay, if it's unfamiliar, it's uncomfortable, I'm probably moving in the right direction.
Right. Yeah, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, my problem is dealing in that space is I tend to be too reactive too quickly to my emotions and my feelings, and I need to stop, just take a breath, acknowledge them, observe them for what they are, and don't be so reactive to just respond to them and feed them. That's where I get tripped up. I always go in the autopilot mode, and I wind up doing something like, how the hell did I get here? I didn't want to do this. So yeah, for me personally, it's just slowing down the thought process and just acknowledge them and observe them. That's why meditation practice is good, to really sit on your thoughts and not be so reactive to them. But
yeah, creating that lag time between thought and deed, thought and action, thought and word, between where you would emotionally react and actually verbalize that reaction versus like,
yeah,
like just before you put that out into the world, you actually pause and take a deep breath. Because you know what it feels like when you have an emotional reaction versus a response.
Right.
A response is something that you can responsibly act upon. You've integrated to some degree. A reaction is just boom, boom. I don't care. I'm having an agitation. I'm gonna act on that. But that only creates more disarray. It only creates more opportunities to clean up more messes that we create out of these patterns. And see, that's the work. You even having that awareness is massive.
Yeah.
Right? Because now you have a choice. Now you have a conscious awareness that if you repeat that, you can't blame anyone other than yourself.
Right.
But you can take responsibility for it and say, you know what? I've done this a number of times. I'm going to now take a conscious effort to take a deep breath. Maybe I have to go deeper into my meditation practice. Maybe I have to look at maybe if there's any food allergies that are agitating me. When does this usually happen? What
Yeah.
points in the day? Is there any association with different things that I'm doing that are triggering a reactive response? I mean, it's an endless rabbit hole, obviously.
Yeah. 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 I was just watching a video with Paul Check. You know who Paul is, right?
Of course.
Yeah, it's funny. I found you. That went to Troy Casey. That led me to Paul Check. Yeah, it keeps going down and down. But I was just watching a video with Paul, and he kind of said it eloquently too. It's like for making unhealthy food choices or something, it could be because that's your only source of happiness. The rest of your life could be a complete wreck, and you need to focus on those areas. That's why you keep coming back to the unhealthy foods, because that's your only means of happiness. So it's the holistic approach to everything. You got to fix other areas of your life, and then the diet might fix itself. Could be some microbiome stuff going on too, but
yeah. I think that's absolutely perfectly said. Yeah, it's very much a holistic thing. I've seen so many people in the health world, in the raw food world, that have made food their religion, and they base everything on that, but they're not really that stable or healthy or happy outside of the food paradigm. And they become very rigid and very neurotic, and that, you've probably seen it, and that becomes their whole kind of reality. But yeah, that's not reality. That's food is here to fuel us. It's not here to be our God or our religion or end all be all. Food is here to fuel and support our life force. And hopefully our life force is going in a direction that's making a contribution in the world. That's not only it's allowing us to do what we love to do. And if we haven't found what we love to do, then that's a really important opportunity to start discovering, like, food help me feel better. So I start to open up to what I love to do. And maybe it's, this podcast and other ways of sharing what someone has found that's helped them heal to some extent, and bringing that awareness, bringing that resource to other people's lives. There's so many different things, but I think, there's so many things I can say about that. I think doing what you love to do and finding a way to only do what you love to do is really the ultimate strategy for health and longevity.
Yeah,
for sure. Food thing and all the other derivatives of that are secondary or tertiary compared to you actually doing what you love to do and being in that state of personal, emotional, mental equanimity. You're not in conflict with yourself. You're not doing something over here that you don't love, but just to pay the bills, but you really want to be doing this. And that's really your life force that you're conflicted with. And your life force is what heals you. The food supports that, but your life force is actually what heals you. And so to not be doing what you love to do, to be avoiding what a lot of people do is they use food as a medication, as a sedative.
Oh yeah.
And so they're sedating their emotions to keep them from doing what they love to do, because to actually deal with the fact that they've been doing things that they hate would actually be so emotionally traumatizing that they actually stuff that, because they don't know how to process their emotions, and they don't have the courage necessarily to admit to themselves that they've been on the wrong path and now it's time to change. Because once you become aware that you're not on the right path, the authentic path, then it's like you have to be responsible. And a lot of people are avoiding responsibility. I think that's probably like the biggest message underneath all of this, is that you have to be able to adopt responsibility for your life. And it sounds really simple, sounds really easy, but it's the biggest challenge for a lot of people. And so when you do start to adopt responsibility, it does mean that it's up to you, but it also means that now you can change your life. You can change your destiny, and you can start to move in the direction of what you love and enjoy.
Yeah. I've always said that this this lifestyle is kind of a blessing and a curse, because once you get the download, the awareness, you're going to see things in a whole different light. And you could go, like you said, maybe too extreme, or go down the rabbit holes, and then you're fearful of stepping outside your front door because of the toxins and the chemicals. You don't want to live in a bubble, but sometimes you can get a little too extreme with certain things, and just got to bring it back into balance and find what works. And that's what I did. I went way too deep into the weeds, and then I poked my head out. I'm like, how the hell did I get here? I'm way out of balance. So I need to come back and try from a different approach. So yeah, I just got to take it all in balance. But it is like the movie The Matrix, though. That one guy's like, I don't want to know anything, erase all this. I just want to, be blissed, just live life. And some people want to do that, and that's fine. But I think once you get that download of information, if you try and live your life against that knowledge, it's going to be a rough ride. It's going to be a rough ride.
Yeah, and that's part of the soul signature, I think, is that the soul is always trying to awaken more. In other words, your unconscious needs to become conscious. Your unconscious is always trying to become conscious. And so this is the existential anxiety and the low-grade depression and the anxiousness
good point.
that people are dealing with, is that they relate it to their job or to their work or to their family. And on one level, that's true. However, that's not really getting to the source. The source is that they're going against their soul command. They're not fully living an authentic, congruent, dharmic life. They're living more the karmic life, which is this, in Ayurveda, that's the wheel of samsara. That's the revolving wheel of sorrow or suffering that people are going. That's the karmic path. The reoccurring patterns people have to let, essentially, that people are avoiding. The dharmic path is the path. It's path every year to the wall, and as a being. So it's like the soul is, the more that you wake up, the more that you start to get sober, in a sense, in all senses, you start to have these things pop up for you that are kind of like an alarm system. It's like a soul-based alarm system that's always trying to reroute you back on the synchronistic track, back on the track of synchronicity and serendipity. And that's where, it's funny because that's where magic and miracles exist. That's the creative trajectory. That's the place that you can create your life from. You can't create from karma. All you're going to create is more karma. You're just going to keep reoccurring, repeating the same patterns. But that's what most people, that samsaric wheel, most people are trapped on. And that's why they're so anxious. I mean, of course, why wouldn't you be anxious? Of course you'd be anxious. You're stuck on a hamster wheel.
Yeah.
I'd be really anxious too. I don't have that much time. I don't know how long this thing's going to keep on going. So, it's like it's harder to make that transition. I get that. But when you do make the transition and you start walking it, you get the courage, you create the focus, and you align yourself with the higher power, which is you. It's just a deeper piece of you. And it's more of an intuitive guidance. You start to notice that it's almost like life is guiding you. Right. There's like an internal GPS system where you're always being rerouted, and there's an intuitive navigation system, and we call that synchronicity. And the more you can start to align with that and follow that, it'll take you in a direction that you never expected. One of the things that a lot of us said in the early raw food days, my early raw food days anyways, was that when you get into living foods, a number of things are probably going to happen. Your vocation is probably going to change, meaning what you do for work or your occupation is going to change. You're probably going to move somewhere. Where you live is probably going to change. The people you associate with is definitely going to change. And so there's going to be these interesting changes that happen. And I've never seen that from any other food-based philosophy. Raw food and living foods and living plant-based diets are very unique in that way, where it actually helps to basically detox somebody the gunk ingredient. Their life was largely subdued because of all the physical structure. Once they start, interesting things happen. I've seen it time and time again. It'd be interesting to do a population study of like, if we could
Yeah.
get like a class study, if we can get like a class of people that have been on like raw food for 10 years, do like a 10-year, 20-year study or something on
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
that are like on a primarily raw food diet, and see the correlation and the commonality of how their life changes and all the different things that occur. Because I've never seen anything that has that much of a synchronistic, transformative power in somebody's entire life.
Yeah.
And it helps you. It helps you get back into your dharma. It helps lead you to what you're really here to do.
Yeah, yeah. I think like the raw foods is the gateway to a much bigger world for sure. One thing that I'm super fascinated about is kind of going back to manifestation and creating a life that you want to see. Is like what are the realms of possibility with doing that? Because I get super fascinated just thinking about how like things get created in the physical world. Like say the phone, for example, the cell phone. Like initially, that was just a thought in someone's head. It was just synapses firing, some neurons moving around, just a thought, and it became into the physical world. So
Right.
what you think can actually manifest. You can touch, taste it, and feel it in the physical world, and that just blows my mind if you think about it. So it's like, what is the realm of possibility? What can we create? What can't we do?
Mm.
That's super fascinating to me. Like, can we change just by thinking our own physiology, how our cells work? Like our chromosomes, the telomeres get shortened over time. Well, if we can create a phone out of thin air, why can't we fix our telomeres and make those last forever? So it's
Absolutely.
fascinating just to think about that stuff, what's possible.
Yeah, well, I think I can break it down into a simple formula, which is think.
Is all I'm going to tell you right now.
Yeah, I think it's think, feel, and do. So it's a very practical, very, very easy to understand type of formula. It's not super mystical. You have to think it. You have to envision the possibility, first of all, and
Right.
then you have to feel it, because again, your feelings, your emotions are a power source. And, one of the things I think we wanted to talk about, probably don't have too much time to go deeper into it, but it's more of an esoteric perspective on the nature of light and dark. There are certain interdimensional energies and just energies in our material world that feed on negative emotion as a power source. So that's why we have the propaganda machines and we have social media. Statistically, we know that things that have a negative energy tend to go viral quicker, right? So there's a life force perspective. There's a siphoning of an energy source through negative emotion and getting people riled up and getting them all triggered with the new trend or propaganda thing. And then they slip this policy around vaccines or 5G internet frequencies in major cities, but you don't know about that because you're so riled up on this little inconsequential thing that's
Your
going on in the
device.
world.
Yeah, you're stuck in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, they'll slide that in there, but but they want to get people triggered and riled up, because the more negatively emotional somebody can get, the more triggered and agitated they can get. They actually become a fuel supply, right? So that must mean that our emotions are a form of they're a form of energy. Well, obviously a form of energy, but they're a form of fuel. So it's like, what are we fueling, right? If we're thinking something, but we're feeling stressed, we're feeling negative, we're feeling disempowered, we're actually feeding the opposite of what we want to envision into the world. So that's number one. And this is the hardest work for people, because the patterns are so deeply ingrained. And the more you focus on positivity, the more you become aware of your own negative habits.
Right.
The more you focus on the light shines on the dark, right? There's no value to the light if it can't cast a light onto the shadow. So, and this is where spiritual bypassing and things happen, where people literally, they become one-seasonal. They become one-sided. They only want to see the good and the glitz and the kind of shiny objects and the light, and they negate the darkness. But you can't be an integrated, holistic human being psychologically
No.
if you're negating one or the other. You have to integrate them both, right? That's the key. This is an integrative perspective, and healing is an integration of opposites. That's just another perspective. Healing is an integration of complementary and diametrically opposed opposites, because it creates there's no separation, right?
Right.
So a trauma is a separation that's occurred that has a story wrapped around it that creates a further separation the more you're in the story. So if you can dissolve the story and create an integration where there's no more separation, that's how you create healing, right? So it's no different than what we're talking about right here. So like the cell phone, for example, it was envisioned, and whatever the process was emotionally, I don't know, but then ultimately there was an action set that was taken after that.
Right.
And this is really key, because interacting with the material world, it's like you have to do. You can't be lazy. Like you have to get out there and apply yourself. Like this podcast isn't going to happen because you're meditating in your closet. Like we got to get on the computer and we got to actually do the thing, right? Yeah. But here's the thing. From what place of being are we doing? Are we manically, anxiously just out there doing? Or are we actually doing from a place of presence? Right. Because one is infinitely more effective than the other. One is going to fuel us, one is going to burn us out. And that's the most practical distinction I think I can share on that perspective. Again, it's not super mystical. It's very straightforward. It's very simple, but it's going through the process. You got to go through the uncomfortable process of actually seeing what thoughts are occurring in your mind and what feelings have been ingrained in your body. And so when you're doing the meditation, sometimes it's harder at first because you become aware of all the uncomfortable stuff underneath the surface. But just holding a space for it, just like I'm not going to attach to it. I'm not going to make up a meaning. It just is what it is. And I'm just going to let it flow. And then the habits are habits that are congruent with what it is that we want to see in the world, with what it is that we want to create, with the person that we want to be, right? You're aligning your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions, your habits. We're lining them up together so we're actually a congruent person. Right. And congruency is what creates and what attracts. It's like a magnet when you're congruent. One of the problems with attraction, like the law of attraction and things of that nature, is that people are like a mismatched magnet. Like they have thoughts up here, they have feelings here, and then they're doing things and none of it's really congruent. Okay. Right? It's all just like, it's like this is here, and I don't even know what to do. I'm just going to throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and see what sticks. Yeah. It's not lined up. So their energy is fragmented. It's going in different directions. And that's probably the biggest cause of ill health is their life force is being dispersed and spread out that it's actually exhausting their physical body.
Right. Well, it's like going kind of like what you said a minute ago. It's like knowing both sides. It's like what the emperor said to Anakin or something. It's like, to know the force, you got to know the dark side and the light. You know what I mean? And I think too, like, a lot of people are saying like, oh, we live in bad times. Like it's a lot of negative energy and all this darkness is happening. But you got to remember at the same time, lightness is rising up to meet that at the same time. You're just focusing on the bad, but it's going to come to a point where that lightness is going to pop through and we're going to be like, oh, we're going to see it. Right. So you got to remember that too. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, and energy flows where attention goes. You live in your own reality. You live in your own perceptual filter, and we have cognitive biases, confirmation biases, where our mind is trying to convert that it's a dangerous world. So that's what we see. That's what we pick up on. We don't necessarily pick up on the magic and the miracles and the serendipity and the lightness of the world. We have to retrain our filters, to actually be able to see both, or preferably after we've done with the doom and gloom and we're kind of tired of that. It's like, okay, I know what that is. I don't really care to deal with it. I don't really care to live in that. I know what it is. I see it, but I don't want to live in that. So I'm going to open up my bandwidth, my perception to magic and miracles and health and wellness and wealth and abundance and prosperity. And I'm going to train myself to see differently. I'm going to train my mind to pick up on those things instead of always picking up on the survival based,
Right.
and then that could go down its own rabbit hole. But the point is simple, right? It's like you have to actually retrain yourself to see what you want to see, because you're always going to see what you want to see, which is the magic trick. You're playing a magic trick on yourself. You just have been indoctrinated potentially. You've been spellbound. When I say you, I mean all of us. We've been spellbound, and essentially a magic trick has been played on us like smoke and mirrors, and the Wizard of Oz projections is playing out in the world, but we haven't pulled back the curtain to see who's playing those little tricks. So we're stuck in this fear, and like, I can't do anything, and it's impossible, and all this stuff. It's like, no, it's not. But if you want it to be, it is.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. I think we're still bound to some, like when you talk about manifestation and stuff like that, I think we're still bound to some physical laws of nature, right? There's just certain lines you just can't cross. Yeah. So if I want to sprout wings and fly, it's just not going to happen, no matter how much I want it to be reality. But so I think there's a fine line, but
well, that's when it gets into fantasy, right? No, we're not talking about fantasy. You got to be realistic in terms of of the realism of the physical body and the physics of reality. Anything is possible in the quantum world, right? So you can be in a meditative internal space and feel, or even like in a psychedelic experience and feel what that feels like, but that's more of a metaphor. That's more of an archetype that you're tuning into. That's not a physical characteristic of your biology or your what's called your phenotype. Your human phenotype, which is your genetic expression, doesn't have a phenotype or a genetic expression for wings, as far as I know, right? A bird does, a pterodactyl does, like those type of being, like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly does. But as far as I know, human beings don't. So there is a grounded reality to all of this for sure. Better to focus your mind on what you can create that's beyond the boundaries of what you have created, instead of getting into fantasies. Because another thing that happens with people is they go so far into fantastical thinking, it has nothing to do with reality. It's actually a way of avoiding their reality, right? So this is a thing to get tuned into when you get into like the new age world and even all the diet stuff. It's like, am I going down this rabbit hole because I don't want to deal with my life?
Right.
Am I going down these rabbit holes and playing with all these ideas because secretly I don't want to deal with the practicalities and responsibilities of my day-to-day life? And that's where, and that's the meeting. That's, for me personally, that's where I take like, okay, let's bring it back home. It's like, we still got a life to live. I still got responsibilities here. So how can I use this information to empower myself to be a better version of myself so I can be more responsible in my life?
Right. Well, let me ask you this. What does Ronnie's future self look like? Are you there yet? And how's your lag time? How far behind are you your future self? What does that look like?
That's a great question. I'm still working on that. The lag time is there. I'm working on it by moving out certain distractions. Like, I'm really seeing the effects of social media and the psychological manipulation and the behavioral manipulation program that's embedded, especially in Facebook, and really seeing how it's kind of like messed with me psychologically.
I mean, like the algorithms and stuff like that? Or
the algorithms and how the whole business thing is set up, and how people are basically like products for advertisement companies.
Right.
So the people making content are actually the product. So we're actually being used for these companies for advertising dollars, and they're based on algorithms which are creating behavioral modification. So it's actually modifying our behavior incrementally, and it's causing us to change our behavior in a way that isn't necessarily supportive. And then there's just like the dopamine and serotonin depletion effect of like, the whole system of likes and comments and validation, and always feeling like I have to create something or else I'm not in that little bubble. But it takes me out of my world and my reality and authentic communication and focusing on my personal goals. So for me, That's one of the big ones that I'm really looking at shifting that so the lag time in my real world can get smaller. I notice when I'm more on social media world, that lag time can be anywhere. But if I separate from that and get back here, I can be more focused on what's real. And then that lag time shortens because my brain isn't being manipulated by these unseen algorithmic forces. I have total utility of my mind all of a sudden, so I can focus it in on closing that gap from who I used to be or who I've been to who I want to be. And your other question was, what does that look like for me?
Yeah.
For me, it's really simple. What I love to do is write research, teach, educate people, you know, podcasts and stuff. But I actually would rather be with the people. That's my gig. I love public speaking. That's my favorite thing to do, and writing books. So it's just more of that. It's just doing that at higher and higher levels, influencing more people, empowering more people to live healthfully and happily, and to live in their power. And so it's everything I'm doing already, but doing it at infinitely higher and higher levels.
Yeah, right on. Cool. Let's touch on how we're doing time wise. Let's touch on one last subject, and then we can start wrapping it up. Have you seen that movie Altered States?
No, I haven't.
I think it came out in the 80s or something like that. But so this guy was experimenting with using psychedelics, and he was trying to I guess in our DNA, there's a genetic code, and all our past memories and past lives are still within us. So like, our grandparents are embedded in us, and like, if they had like some kind of trauma or fear, that could be affecting us energetically. So it's all in there. We can remember all the past lives of, past generations. And so he was experimenting, and it was kind of a silly movie, but he tapped into his Neanderthal past, and his physiology changed, and he turned into an ape. And it was like a horror movie, but it was kind of silly. But it just makes me think about, like, so those past memories are in there in our DNA, in our genetics. And so we can tap into those. But I wanted to ask you too about what I call is the ancestral detoxification. If we need to detox these past traumas that might be plaguing us in our experience, and how we go about doing that. Because like, if my grandfather had a fear of heights or something, and then unbeknownst to me, I have a fear of heights, but I don't know where that came from. It's just getting passed on. Is that a reality? Is that possible? Is that something that you've seen or work with? Or did I lose you?
No, I'm right here. Yeah, that's absolutely real. That's 100% real. I've studied this. I've experienced it. I've done a lot of medicine journeys, whether that be ayahuasca or mushroom journeys or iboga or Kambo frog medicine. I have a lot of experience with this, and studying epigenetics. So basically what happens from an epigenetic perspective is that not only the genes, but also the memory patterns encoded into the imprintations of memories are skipped over a generation. So we'll genetically take on our grandparents' genes more than we will necessarily inherit our parents' genes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And our genes are malleable, by the way. They're not set in stone, but there are proclivities. There's certain tendencies that we may take on based on the genes that we inherit, right? So it's adjustable, but we have certain tendencies. There's certain weaknesses that need to be improved upon, and we might have certain strengths that other people wouldn't have had because of our gene pool. So that brings in also the memory imprints of our ancestors, the generational imprints. So if you, for example, have if somebody is coming from a Jewish gene pool or African American gene pool, or whatever the case is, I think every culture has been rooted in slavery at some point or another, Native Americans. We can see there's interesting physiological and biological associations to particular events in particular cultural upbringing that's happened throughout the generations. And we won't go deeper into like the nitty gritty of that, but you can imagine what it would do to people emotionally and psychologically if they have a generation that was rooted in the Holocaust or in the slave trade or in genocidal, like I'm quarter Armenian. So there, if you have like something rooted in the genocide, I have a lot of actual personal stories. I came to find out that me and a past partner were in a past life, we actually were in the Holocaust. At least that's kind of the memory that came through a medicine ceremony. And it was like, that explained a lot why her and my dynamic was very much a clingy dynamic, but it wasn't clingy in the normal sense. There was like a soul, like there was like we were actually, there was something that like we couldn't imagine being away from each other, and there was a fear around losing each other. Irrational. We both had it, and it caused a lot of complications and emotional triggering and different things. And then finally there was this new awareness of this. And I actually had an experience through a medicine ceremony where I purged the deepest emotional trauma that I had ever experienced. And I had no idea where it was coming from. It just felt like it was an endless pit of pain and agony. It almost felt like there was some kind of genocide, like I was part of a genocide experience. And then after months later, she had told me she had this kind of experience with the whole Holocaust thing. And then it linked it together. I was like, oh my God, now that
makes sense.
Sense to me. Things are alive. And it's kind of like talking about the wheel of samsara. Well, these samskaric wounds create scars. If you want to, I don't know if saying it creates a scar in the soul is accurate. Like I'm not, you can't measure this. I don't really know, but that idea makes sense, right? So the soul comes into the body with all these different experiences that sometimes need to be worked out. Sometimes they need to be worked out in relationships. They need to be worked out in different experiences. Everybody's different. Some people come in with a heavier load to work out. Some people are pretty clear and they go about their life. And there's a lot of modalities that, that can be recommended. That's beyond the scope of this conversation, but it's more so just to say like, hey, yeah, that is real. I've definitely experienced it. I've studied it. There's a book, I'm thinking, what's the title of the book? I think the book's called It's Not Your Fault. And it touches on this, the epigenetic thing. It goes into the ancient. One of the things I think is interesting is there is a psychological or a psychic imprint of the devastation of all the different cataclysmic events that have happened in our world history. So we've gone through like 5 extinctions or 6. That's what they say. And so there is an imprint in the human psyche, in the collective psychic field that each one of us is a part of, that is a trauma. It's an existential trauma from cataclysmic events that have occurred throughout the duration of this planet, and somehow has created a wounding or a trauma in each one of us to varying levels, varying degrees.
Right.
That's a really interesting thing to tune into when you do have a persistent anxiety, you do have a persistent kind of emotional, psychological kind of concern, or you're just not quite
like a blockage. Yeah,
it's a blockage. And so what do? We medicate that. We get antidepressants and serotonin reuptake inhibitors and anti-anxiety medication. We medicate all that stuff because it's not normal. Like you have a chemical imbalance. You have a psychological or a tendency to depression. I think that's all nonsense. Like I think it's actually rooted in the dysfunction of the human being in modern society. I think actually we live in a dysfunctional society, which creates a dysfunction within the human psyche. And that's really that to me is really the route to healing, to actually be able to look at all this stuff and put it on the table and actually acknowledge that we are all kind of messed up on many levels. And it's not really our fault necessarily.
No.
But we do have to take responsibility for our trauma. Our trauma may not be our fault. We may have been victimized, but we can't stay a victim. We can't become a victim from the trauma. We have to actually become a superhero and really take responsibility for what's ours, and then do the healing necessary so we can get out of this whole mess. We can get out of the samsaric wheel and actually live the life we're meant to live.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what we were talking in the beginning about how, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And, because we're so quick to suppress, we didn't even talk about food or detoxification really about, if we get a cough or a sniffle, we're quick to suppress that and stop that. But that's our elimination. And we're
Right.
suppressing emotions and energy too. And we need to express those. Those need to come out. Yeah, you can't hide those all the time. And we've almost gotten to the point where we've suppressed ourselves where we don't even want to feel what it's like to be human anymore. We're so sedated and stimulated with all these things that we don't even know what it is to be human anymore. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about.
Absolutely.
Are you familiar? I don't know if I'll open this can of worms. Are you familiar with the Schumann resonance?
Of course, absolutely.
It's like the frequency of the earth or something, and how like around, I don't know, like around the holidays, religious times when people are thinking more about Jesus or religion, there's a spike in it. That's kind of crazy to think about. Like maybe, I don't know, this is my random thinking, but maybe like as the messiahs or prophets were created because people are thinking about it so much that it manifested this energy and it created it because we needed it. So I don't know.
Interesting. I haven't heard that. I do know that because of all the electromagnetic pollution, the Wi-Fi frequencies, it's disturbed our natural electromagnetic frequency, which is identical to the Schumann resonance, which is the frequency of the earth, as you said. Right. And when you get barefoot, grounded, you get into a body of water, particularly cold ocean or river, lake water. You're connected to the sun, you're connected to the natural earth. You're aligning to the Schumann resonance, which is one of the greatest healing forces in the world. Like the earth is actually the number one anti-inflammatory, scientifically speaking. It's the best blood thinner ever.
Yeah.
Which is why actually if somebody gets into grounding 90 minutes a day, they have to get off blood thinning medication.
Really? Wow.
It might thin their blood too much because it actually is the best anti-inflammatory. Yeah. It's really crazy when you look into all this. That's one of the first things I got into was earthing. There's a book called Earthing by Clint Ober. I got into that, 10 years ago. And that's really what got me into nature, got me into raw food. And really this connection to nature was that book.
Nice.
So interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about that for hours, man, but I think we've already got about, we should wrap this up. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I could talk to you all day, man. This is awesome. But just want to say thanks for giving me your time, and I love the work that you're doing. And if people want to connect with you and work with you, because you do counseling or you coaching, right? So people can.
Yeah, people can find more about my work and my services, and I have an online holistic health mastery course. It's an online holistic nutrition certification course. My podcast, obviously. You can find all that at ronnielandis.net, RONNIELANDIS.net. That's where all my information is. I have a YouTube channel given out so much between the YouTube channel, and there's other resources as well. So just go to the website, find that. You can find me on Instagram. I am on Facebook. Unfortunately, I won't be able to get away from it completely because we do a lot of integration with it, but I'm not going to be on there as much. That's the idea. Yeah, but I have all my other services and the podcast that people can connect with me for. Okay, cool. And so, do you just do in-person counseling, coaching, or do you do over Skype and stuff like that too, right? It's usually over Skype, over the phone, typically because people aren't necessarily in my region. If someone's in my area, then I'll connect with them one-on-one. Nice. Any future projects coming up? Any talks or anything? Or yeah, there's always events going on, speaking events, future projects. Well, there's a number of things going on. I mean, I guess the podcast is always an ongoing project. I have takes a lot of time, man. It's an energy sucker for sure. Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the business ventures that I'm involved in is a superfood organic plant-based company called Purium,
Nice.
which is an absolutely incredible superfood company, the best in the industry, in my opinion, in terms of sourcing, supporting people on various levels of healing and providing them an alternative form of nutrition. That they don't normally get from their conventional food supply, even the organic food supply. So that's something that I've been really, really excited about, and teaming up with other health leaders to really spread that message and provide people real nutrition, superfood nutrition. So that's the thing that I'm really, really excited about. That's the thing that takes most of my professional energy.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I wanted to yeah, well, maybe we'll have to do another interview because I'm curious about like CBD benefits and the cannabinoid receptors and all that stuff. And I know Purium has a great product line for that stuff, the CBD. So we'll
Hmm.
talk that in a future date. But
Awesome. Would love to.
all right, cool, man. Well, thanks for connecting. This is awesome. You got so much knowledge, so much wisdom, dude. I appreciate it. And I just love the work that you're doing. So thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
All right, cool. Don't hang up. I'm just going to turn this off. All right. Bye, everybody.